Both Death of Superman and Reign of the Supermen are two of the most underrated comic book movies of all time. I've always loved these two movies, and recently I just gave them a rewatch. And honestly, I gotta say, I think they belong up there with the big dog movies, like Into the Spider-Verse, the Batman, the DCEU, the MCU, all these movies. I think that these two DC animated movies belong up there with the top dogs, man. The Death and Return of Superman arc in the comics is one of my favorite Superman arcs of all time, and honestly, I think it's one of the best arcs in comic book history. And the way that these two movies adapt this arc is so great, not only just as its own standalone story, but it also helps serve the purpose of the wider DC animated movie universe. Now, this universe is very controversial. I'm not too big a fan of the entire universe as a whole, but the Superman part of it and these two movies specifically absolutely blow everything else out of the water, in my opinion. For starters, one of the things I love most about these two movies is the way it depicts Superman's relationship with Metropolis and the citizens of Metropolis. The first movie opens up with Superman saving the mayor and a few police officers from Intergang, and you can already see that Superman's built a great reputation in Metropolis. Everybody's friendly with him, everybody likes him. As soon as the crisis is over, Superman's asked to take pictures and he's being, oh, hey Superman, everyone's saying hi to him. A bit later in the movie, Superman's talking to Lois Lane and people just keep driving by saying hi to him as well.
I don't know what to say. It's
Superman. Looking good.
gonna be a reminder of just how alien you are. People forget that when you're saving them from falling airplanes.
True, but I have faith
You
that...
rock, Superman!
Thanks. You do too.
A great addition to this movie is the character Bibbo that they added. Now, while he's not a super big or super important character, he really just represents the way Metropolis feels about Superman and the pride they feel for Superman. Superman's interacted with this guy a couple times. He saved him on his sailing boat, and Bibbo just talks about Superman like they're the best of friends, like they're super close, and I don't blame him. I'd talk that way too if I was repeatedly saved by Superman. And in the second movie in his duology, Bibbo takes his relationship with Superman and we see how it inspires him to actually be a hero and be a better person, and he ends up leading a resistance to fight off the villains in the second movie in this duology.
Light him up!
Another thing I really like about these two movies is the way that Lois and Clark's relationship is depicted. It's not often that we get a depiction of Lois and Clark where they're in the early stages of their relationship. For about the first half of Death of Superman, Lois doesn't even know that Clark is Superman, and I think this is great because this tells us, the audience, that Lois Lane is in love with Clark Kent and not Superman, which is a small detail that I love personally. A lot of people like it when she falls in love for Superman or falls in love with both of them. I prefer when she just falls for Clark's natural dorky self. One detail about Lois and Clark's relationship in this movie that I really like is the fact that even though Lois clearly loves Clark so much, she still doesn't trust him because she can tell that Clark is keeping things from her. And we see this reflected in the night where Lois meets Clark's parents. And when she's talking to Jonathan and Martha Kent, she's thinking to herself, man, there's so much about Clark that I just don't know. Why is that? And we kind of see them go back and forth about this outside of his apartment when Clark's trying to get her a taxi. And this just adds more stakes to their relationship because it kind of means that if Clark doesn't tell her what's going on soon, it's probably not going to work out. And so eventually, Clark does tell her in this movie. And this is a classic I'm Superman, and he takes the glasses off, and Lois doesn't obviously believe he's Superman at first till she really looks at him and she really sees it and puts everything together.
Look at me.
Oh my God. This is insane.
And one thing I really like about this moment is that Clark actually had two secrets to tell Lois. The first secret was that he's Superman, and the second secret is that he loves Lois Lane. He wanted to tell Lois that he loved her. And the small detail about this that I really like is that this was the second secret Clark wanted to tell Lois. And me personally, I interpreted that as Clark being more afraid to tell Lois that he loved her rather than being more afraid to tell her that he's Superman. As great as it is, Lois and Clark's relationship in this movie is just one aspect of why the movie's great, but there's a lot of other stuff we gotta go over here. The wider Justice League is really included in these two movies, and I really like how they utilize them, while also making the movie centered around Superman and the Superman characters. In Death of Superman, we see the Justice League encouraging Clark to tell Lois his secret, and we see them fighting Doomsday. And I gotta say, I really like, for the most part, how the Justice League fought Doomsday. I really like that it was shown that the Justice League is actually giving their all. None of them were holding back. The only gripe I did have is that they were doing the cliche of going at Doomsday one-on-one instead of going at Doomsday as a team. And I think if they went at Doomsday as a team, it would have shown Doomsday to be even more powerful, with the fact that he can beat the Justice League while they're working together to stop him. But eventually, the entire Justice League tries to fight Doomsday and they all fail, and that leaves Superman versus Doomsday. This animated movie did a really good job of making this fight seem very large in scale. I love how during this fight they were flying all throughout Metropolis, they were fighting in the city, they were fighting on a bridge, they were fighting at the Hall of Justice. And even though they're fighting in this populated area and in this very dense area, since this is such a desperate fight, you can very clearly tell that Superman is not holding back. I love that Superman in this movie is able to keep his confidence, keep his structure, and keep his focus, while you can also tell that as the fight goes on, he gets more and more desperate to defeat Doomsday. And things like that just give the audience more stakes to see in the fight. Obviously, I've seen this movie before, but time and time again when I rewatch it, I genuinely feel nervous for Superman, even though I know how it's going to end. And that's what a good movie does. One scene during this fight that I actually really liked, even though it's not that impactful, is when Lex Luthor tried to show up to defeat Doomsday. Even though that's a small moment in this fight, it really is just such an accurate thing for Lex to do. He sits and waits for Superman to get knocked away by Doomsday and tries to come in to save the day to take all the glory for himself. But obviously it didn't work, and we get a scene of Lex almost dying, but then Superman comes in to save him. And in my opinion, nothing will be better than when the superhero has to step up and save one of his villains. Even though that's what Superman's supposed to do, it's still always nice to see. And the very last thing I want to mention about this fight is the climax of the fight, or the ending of the fight. We see Superman is absolutely broken down and tired while Doomsday is only getting stronger. Lois is standing right there trying to get Doomsday off of Superman, and she thinks she's going to die, so she tells Clark in her seemingly last moments that she loves him back. And we all know classic Superman, he sees Lois in danger, he's going to lock in. So he musters all the strength he has left. He breaks the ground, he flies at Doomsday, and he breaks Doomsday's neck with all the force he can muster. And while Superman was able to kill Doomsday, obviously Doomsday was also able to kill Superman by stabbing him through the chest. We got one last scene with Lois and Clark that was so emotional and so heavy, and Superman dies. And that's pretty much it for this first movie. Death of Superman is honestly such a great watch, and I'll never get tired of it. But now we gotta move on to Reign of the Superman, which does just as many great things, in my opinion. The very first thing this movie opens up with is introducing the 4 new Supermen that we see: Superboy, Steel, the Eradicator, and Cyborg Superman. The first perspective we get on these guys is the civilian perspective from Cat Grant reporting from the Daily Planet. And we basically learn, oh, these 4 Supermen have popped up ever since Superman's been gone. Which one of them is real? We don't know. And obviously as a comic book reader, I know who all these guys are. I know what all their purposes are. I know all their origins. But I'll be honest, when I first watched this movie, I was not a comic book reader. I didn't know what was going on, and I really liked the mystery. And the movie spends time deep diving into each of the 4 different Supermen, explaining their origins, explaining who they are, and what their connection to Superman is. And I really like how near the middle of this movie, all 4 of these Supermen end up at LexCorp fighting each other pretty much. We get the Eradicator versus Superboy, and then we get Steel versus the Eradicator, and then we get the Eradicator versus Cyborg Superman, and it's all great. And one small detail I really like about this scene is that while Cyborg Superman and the Eradicator were busy fighting each other, they caused an explosion, and only Superboy and Steel noticed this explosion, and they decided to save the civilians in the area. And that small detail in the movie actually shows the audience which of the 4 Supermen are actually the good guys in the movie. But while the movie is carrying this mystery of which of the 4 Supermen is the real deal, I really like how Lois Lane handles this. Obviously, we know how close she was to the actual Superman. We know that she knew he was Clark. We know they were in love. So she's got more stakes in finding out who the real Superman is than almost any other character in the movie. And Lois is extremely careful in finding out who the new Superman is, and I really, really like that. Not once in the movie does she call any of the new Supermen Clark. Not once does she say, I love you. Not once does she ever leak details on their relationship because she doesn't trust them. I mean, Clark died in her hands. It makes perfect sense for her to be this untrustworthy of all four Supermen. Even when Cyborg Superman shows up to her apartment or whatever, she questions him instantly, and she's instantly trying to find out, is this the real Clark? How much does he remember? Does he know who I am? Etc. etc. And eventually, I mean, Cyborg Superman just fails the test, and she doesn't give it away. And this movie just proves that at the end of the day, Lois Lane can carry her own project without Superman. Like, she did a great job in this movie. She was pretty much the main character, and I could watch a whole nother movie about her if they had one. Another thing I want to take note of, like I said before at the beginning of this video, is the Justice League's involvement in this movie is done very well. In order for this movie to get to the main villain and get to the main plot, they kind of had to find a way to get the Justice League out of the way so the four Supermen could take the spotlight and not be so easily overpowered by the Justice League. So what did they do? They involved Darkseid, and they had Darkseid trap the Justice League somewhere in deep space so that the light could be shined on all four Supermen in this movie. In my opinion, that was a great, non-lazy way to keep the movie centered on Superman. A lot of comic movies these days will just say, oh, these characters aren't going to appear. These characters aren't going to appear. They're just not there. They just didn't know. They just weren't in the area, whatever, to explain why a character simply couldn't have shown up and helped out and, saved the day. But this movie did a great job of explaining where those characters were and making their absence felt as well. And speaking of Darkseid, let's talk about his involvement in both of these two movies. First of all, Darkseid is the one that created Doomsday to kill Superman. I mean, that's not Doomsday's comic book origin, but in this universe, it works really well to continue to set up Darkseid as the main antagonist. Like I said, Darkseid was also the one to trap the Justice League in space, and at the end of the movie, we find out that Darkseid is manipulating Cyborg Superman in order to build a cyborg army to take over the Earth. And even though Darkseid was the one basically manipulating Cyborg Superman, he also had his very own malicious intentions as well. In the first movie, Death of Superman, we see Hank Henshaw, the astronaut. He's a huge Superman fan, like all of us. He's in danger in space, and instead of actually doing his job, he puts a little bit too much faith in Superman to come do all the work and save the day. And result of that is his entire crew dies, and he gets put in a very, very critical state.
We're not going to make it.
Like hell we're not. Superman will save us. Just like always.
Break it up!
Stay calm, everyone. He's on his way. I know it.
Losing thrusters.
Hey, what are you?
It's okay, Terry. You can always count on Superman. Terry, no! Superman. I knew you'd come.
And throughout the movie, we see Darkseid manipulating him, but at the very end, he breaks free of that manipulation and basically becomes his own villain, just looking for revenge against Superman. Cyborg Superman is one of my favorite villains, so this story for him it's good enough for me. I like it. I mess with it. Another thing that I really like about this movie is the way that they reveal Superman's survival. In Death of Superman, we get information on how Superman came to Earth and on his alien nanny that we see referenced in the first movie.
Purpose on this journey is to inform you, assist you, and protect you and all Kryptonian life. During
Wait a
your
sec.
development
Is he?
Yes, Miss Lane? You're looking at the last son of Krypton's nanny.
Now, in Reign of the Superman, that alien nanny turns out to be the Eradicator, whose sole purpose is to protect and take care of Superman when Superman can't take care of himself. And so we get a scene where Steel is in the Fortress of Solitude, and he's looking at the Eradicator in some giant beam of energy, and he learns that Kal-El is soaking up the solar energy from the Eradicator. And where's the Eradicator getting that solar energy from? Running around Metropolis pretending to be Superman. And while all this is being figured out, of course, Steel and the Eradicator are fighting each other. And right when Steel's about to lose this fight, Clark gets out of his spaceship in his amazing black suit. Can I just say, man, the aura that Clark has with the long hair and the black suit, oh my gosh, so tough. So tough. Now, after Clark wakes up, Steel pretty much gives Clark the rundown on what's been going on. Clark also gets the chance to meet Superboy, and the three of them head out to go fight Cyborg Superman. On the way, we see Lex and Clark interact for the first time since Clark's death.
Oh, it's you.
Lex Luthor, as I live and breathe.
Yeah, what's that about?
Can I just say, I really like how Lex Luthor was also done in this movie. Like, at the beginning, obviously, he's created Connor Kent, Superboy. Obviously, he wants to market Connor as LexCorp's new Superman for the whole world. And it kind of seems like he has bad and evil intentions, and he's definitely not a good guy in this movie. But I like how at the end of the day, his goals and his wants aligned with the good guys, so they all ended up working together to save the day. And in this movie, it gets to a point where things are so bad that Lex himself literally says, yeah, I wish Superman was alive now too.
So, do you really think Kal-El is alive?
I don't know, but for the first time, I really feel like it's possible.
For the first time. I hope he is.
And surprisingly, all of this actually leads to Lex becoming a Justice League member in the post-credit scene for this movie. Now let's talk about the final fight between Superman and Cyborg Superman in this movie, because this entire fight is filled with such good writing and such, like, it's such a tense fight. You can see all the stakes, you can feel all the stakes. This is done really well. A lot of this fight is really just Cyborg Superman spilling all of his emotions, all of his grief, all of his origin, everything to Superman and explaining why the way he is Superman's fault. And at the beginning of this fight, I really appreciate how Superman's still trying to save Cyborg Superman. He tells him it's not too late to change this, it's not too late to be better. And eventually, of course, that does not work. Another thing I really like about this fight is that it's actually not Superman versus Cyborg Superman. It's Superman and Lois versus Cyborg Superman. I really liked the way these two movies followed Lois and Clark's relationship, and the fact that Lois was there to help Clark at the very end of the final fight was just the cherry on top. And my absolute favorite part about this fight is the very end, where Lois is able to let the sun shine on Superman, and he gets most of his powers back and absolutely destroys Cyborg Superman. This entire duology is so well animated, especially with all the fights, and I just can't appreciate it enough, man. These two movies are done so well, and I can't recommend it enough to anybody. If you like Superman, if you want to get into Superman's lore more, I would recommend these two movies before almost any other movies. If you watch this video all the way and you haven't seen Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman in a while, I would highly recommend to stop right now and go watch those movies, because I think you'll enjoy that way more. But if you watch till the end right now, I'm just going to say thank you. I appreciate that a lot. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and hit the like button down below and leave me a comment. And if you did enjoy the video, leave me a comment on what I could do better. That's all I've got for today, and I'll see you guys in the next one.